everyone, I'm Kaya Ambrose and I am supporting the KIX Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning System and Process.
And my name's Simon Hearn, and I'm also supporting KIX MEL with all these videos.
And this session is going to tackle progress markers. So Simon, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So in the last session, Simon gave you an overview of why we're doing this system with KIX, this MEL system with KIX. And we pointed out that there will be two fairly specific and innovative ways of collecting monitoring data around outcomes and behavioral change. And the first way that we will do that is through progress markers. The next session we'll hear about outcome cases, which is the second way. So let's look through progress markers first and what they are and how we'll be using them in KIX. Progress markers describe a change pathway. So a progression of change from a starting point to an end point. However, it's not necessarily always so linear. So we have to keep in mind that slide that Simon shared with us in the last session with the pathways kind of going all over the place. We know that it's not a linear progression. And what we're capturing with the progress markers is nuanced change. So not kind of big snapshots in time of big significant changes, but those smaller changes that really make up the steps of a pathway and that are important to know, to track and to know, to see what direction we're going in and if we're going in the direction that we had hoped we were going in. The progress markers can help us to answer this question. How can we know that we are moving towards the ultimate broader outcomes? And the progress markers we've developed, which you will have a copy of in your MEL package. The progress markers are for you yourselves as project teams, as research teams. And they've been developed as almost like a hypothesis, almost like a theory of change. Like this is how we expect the change to happen. So they serve as a starting point to be able to really look at the change that teams are engaging in. Next slide, please, Simon. The progress markers link up with the results framework. So the results framework encompasses and embodies and explains all of the overall key outcomes that KIX as a program is looking for. And the progress markers will link into and reflect a few of those outcomes as they relate to you as regional grantees. So when you're looking at the progress markers and when you're implementing the progress marker tracking system, you'll be doing it with these three outcomes in mind: the immediate outcome 3.4, the immediate outcome 3.6, and the intermediate outcome 2.3. And you'll see that all of these outcomes, again, are about yourselves and about your own change pathways and how you as research teams, what the process is that you're going through to better implement and to better support that policy influence that overall KIX is looking for. What are some of the changes that you're doing as a team to get better at doing that connection and trust building and relationship building and the sharing of your research? Next slide, please, Simon. The progress markers overall for the grantees, for the regional grantees, capture these changes. This is what KIX is hoping that it can support in your research teams. The high quality, applied and contextually relevant research, the ways that you strengthen capacity of education stakeholders that you're working with in your research, and how you mobilize the research evidence that you've produced as well. Next slide, please. And as mentioned, these are all captured in more detail in that set of progress markers that you have in your package of MEL tools. These are just a few examples of the progress markers that are in that whole list. The progress markers that we use are divided into 3 categories, we can say, of progress markers, and these show a progression of change. When we start off doing something, we hope that we'll get better at it, and the way that we do it will shift and change as we get more information, as we encounter new people, as we build our own capacity. So the 3 categories here, the expect to see, the like to see, and the love to see, represent that progression of change and that deeper transformation that KIX hopes that research teams will have as they engage with the KIX program over the 5 years. Next slide, please.
Just before, can I add something?
Yes.
So with the love to sees, we often say that these are outside of your accountability zone. So no one's going to come along and say, you haven't achieved your love to sees. Your project hasn't succeeded. These are really a stretch. They are intentionally ambitious. They're sort of a guide for you to aim towards. That doesn't mean you're not going to achieve them. Some of you may, but it's not expected. That's why they're not expect to sees. There's no expectation that you'll achieve love to sees, and it may be that these won't come about for many years after KIX. And on the other hand, the expect to sees are not necessarily great results for you. If you achieve your expect to sees, you've done the kind of minimum. It's not going to be something that is going to be wildly reported in your annual reports. So in the middle is where you get the results that you will be reporting in your annual report, and really that explain and describe the progress that you're making and the success you're having. Those are the like to sees. So the bulk in the like to sees. The expect to sees just say that you're getting there on your journey, and then the love to sees are very ambitious, something to aim towards, but not necessarily to hold yourself against.
Thank you, Simon. And just linking with Simon, building off of Simon's point, these are a guide, a list that we've created for all grantees. And we recognize that depending on your team, on your context, on your history, on the time that your organization and that particular team has existed, maybe this is a second or third phase of a project, you may be at different starting points in this list of progress markers as compared to other research projects. So not everyone is starting at the same baseline, base point. People can be starting at different points. And there may be progress markers that haven't been included, that at the beginning of any program or project, it's difficult to pre-envision every change that will happen. So we are looking for progress markers to be added as well. And as Simon said, specifically in this like to see section, which is, really where the work is being done and where the changes are happening and the innovation is happening with the way that you engage in research and your research users. So take a look at that list, and as you progress with your project, keep an eye out for changes that aren't represented here, but that still make up part of your change pathway. And you'll have ways of including those as well when you fill out the tools. overall, I think what we want to say is this isn't a checklist. This isn't an accountability checklist for IDRC. This is an internal guide to demonstrate and to track how you're changing and evolving as a research team. Next slide, please. This is the format that you will use to fill in the progress markers and your observations on change around those progress markers. And this will be, it's available in English, Spanish, and French, and it's online and is part of the MEL Center. So you will have a link that you can distribute amongst the appropriate team members to be able to capture these progress markers. And we'll explain a little bit more later on options for capturing the progress markers. Simon, do you want to say anything else about the form?
Yeah, I think once you have the link to that, just go in and have a look, familiarize yourself with the questions that it's asking, but it's fairly straightforward. The main question that you'll see is the description of change, and we're just Kai will just show you some examples of what people put in that field, because that's really where the detail is.
Great, next slide. So these are some examples of what you might enter into that description field. So the other fields are fairly straightforward identifier fields, which project is reporting and where. But the description of the observation of the change as it's linked to the progress marker is really the key part. So this is one example related to the progress marker. IDRC would expect to see grantees developing a research uptake strategy based on an assessment of the policy landscape and stakeholders. So this particular project noted down that they did engage in a stakeholder mapping of those key decision makers, and with that they analyzed the membership of the local education group. And in doing so, in doing this mapping, this has also helped to establish conversations with the different stakeholders. And these conversations and the relationships built from this can help to obtain data and disseminate findings. And as they've put, develop a level of trust that allows for these productive interactions. The next example is another expect to see level. So IDRC would expect to see grantees engaging in planning for sustainable sustainable scaling of their research. And the description that was related to this team, that this team filled in, talked about conducting field visits to participating schools, the schools that they work with in their project, to really try and understand their data needs and data use practices as well. So this is a project that's recognizing the schools as a key data user in the future, but they want to understand their needs and interests in terms of data. And the project states that this collection and this kind of diagnostic will help to inform the data collection and dissemination strategy that they hope will be effective at both school and district level.
So just to add to this one, some of you will be part of the ROSI cohort, the research on scaling innovation in education. For you, this will be a really important progress marker, because with the ROSI team, you'll be on a journey of learning and developing skills, particularly around scaling. So this one was actually proposed by that team, and particularly used to to see the journey that those rosy cohorts are going on. But for the rest of you, scaling will be still a part of your work. And so with this example here, the only thing I would say to this team is to have a bit more of a connection to the scaling pathway, the scaling strategy. So how does this observation relate to the approach to scaling?
Next slide, please. So how do we do this? How do we collect the information for the progress markers, the observations about our own change? And it's important to emphasize, again, this isn't a checklist. It's not an accountability mechanism. This is first and foremost a self-reflection exercise for yourselves as teams. But at the same time, it's going to give IDRC relevant and useful information so that IDRC can ask themselves, are we supporting the research teams in the best way that we can so that they are able to conduct these relationships with decision makers and ultimate research users in a way that pushes forward scaling of innovation and pushes forward knowledge sharing and the knowledge management that goes with the research initiative. So it has several uses, but we want to emphasize that in the collection process, you need to make it useful and convenient for yourselves as well. So it's really up to you how you want to collect this information for the progress marker journals to fill in that format that we shared on the screen. You can do this in terms of timing. This progress markers and the collection of data around progress markers needs to be done before your annual report so that you have that information to reflect on and include in your annual report. But other than that, you can decide if you want to share the link with the whole team and people can input their observations on different progress markers on a continuous basis. You may want to bring the team together and have specific explicit spaces, organized spaces where you sit down all together and look at the progress marker journal and fill in the data then. Think about the spaces and systems that you already have and how you can build in some of this data collection within those spaces. Think about who needs to participate from your team. And think about the frequency that makes sense for you. You want to not forget things that you've observed that are relevant to your change process and relevant to the progress markers, but you also don't want to make it such a burden. Simon, you had something to add on this too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one example from one of the global projects which started last year. So they have collaborating partners in 3 different countries, and so they created their own tool which mirrored the form that we just showed you, but was tailored to their particular needs, and they gave each of their collaborating partners one of these forms and taught them through how to fill it in. So then they fill in according to their own practices, and then the MEL lead collates those centrally and adds them to the KIX system all in one go. That's just one example.
Great, next slide. So to recap our reminders about progress markers. Progress markers are about your project. They're like a self-reflection on how you're changing and engaging and evolving and deepening your research and knowledge mobilization practice. As I've mentioned, they're not an accountability mechanism or a checklist for IDRC. They're for your, first and foremost, for your own internal learning, which in turn helps IDRC learn as well, how they're best supporting you. You can treat them as a journal or a notebook or a diary to record the different actions and changes that you as a team are embodying. And as I mentioned, there's different ways of doing that. You can do it individually or you can do it as a group. Next slide, please. It's important to make sure that you're doing a separate entry for each observation. So you may observe quite a few changes, maybe in different team members, but make sure for each of those observations, each of those changes that you've noted, that those have their own unique entry in the progress marker journals. So you'd fill in one, close it, open it up again, fill in another. One progress marker journal may pertain to multiple countries or individuals, and that is fine. There will be an option in those journals to tick the multiple countries or individuals if the observation around the change pertains to several entities. And just remember that progress markers, again, are about yourselves, your team. What we'll look at next are the changes that you're seeing in the different stakeholders, education stakeholders that you're working with. And we have a different tool to capture those changes. Thank you.
Thanks, and see you in the next one.